Your daughter had an affair.
Yelled my daughter's mother-in-law, Claire. My daughter would never do such a thing. I desperately defended Kayla's innocence.
Then how do you explain the baby's eyes?
I had no words to respond. Kayla was in the corner of the room, holding her baby and crying. The baby she was holding had dark eyes, which was unusual for someone of American descent.
Take her and get out, and you'll be paying a hefty alimony later.
We were miserably thrown out. But I was certain of one thing. My daughter wasn't lying. So, I decided to get a DNA test. The test results let them realize their mistakes. From there, their lives quickly took a downward spiral. I'm Rebecca. Today is a special day, so I was more pumped up than usual. On the table were potato salad, hamburgers, and tomato soup. All of them are Kayla's favorites.
They look so delicious. Thank you, Mom.
Seeing Kayla's delighted expression made me happy too. Joyful voices came from the large TV in the room, and the warm electric light enveloped the room. Even the girl in the painting on the wall seemed to be smiling and celebrating Kayla. Feel free to dig in, tomorrow is your wedding day. At the mention of the wedding, Kayla lowered her eyes a little.
It would have been nice if Dad could be here too.
My husband is currently working overseas on an assignment. Originally, there was no plan, but he has a connection to that country and volunteered for the assignment. However, the work there has been full of troubles, and he is too busy to come back for Kayla's wedding. It's disappointing, but I have no complaints against my husband. After all, he earned the money for this house and Kayla's tuition. Well, he's busy. I'll take lots of pictures and send them to him instead.
Thank you. I really wish we could live together, but Simon wouldn't agree.
Simon is Kayla's fiancé. Due to his strong request, Kayla was to move in with his family immediately after the wedding. Yeah, he seems like a nice guy, but he might be a bit of a mommy's boy since his dad isn't around.
That's what I'm worried about, but he's a good person.
Kayla blushed slightly. Meals with just the two of us would become rare. So, I needed to enjoy this moment, but I had one concern. But I find Claire a bit suspicious. I'm worried about Kayla living with her. Claire is Simon's mother. I first met Claire during a family gathering, but I didn't like her from the start. She was small and thin, with short, messy hair mixed with gray. Her eyes were always wide open and darting around, which made her quite eerie. Even in her words, there were glimpses of a nervous personality. I was worried about Kayla living with such a person.
Don't worry too much. The house is close, so if anything happens, I'll be there right away.
Kayla smiled and took a big bite of her hamburger. That's right. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. With that, we ended the ominous talk and spent a pleasant time reminiscing together. The wedding was grand, and 6 months flew by. Fortunately, there were no major problems in their married life, and I, though lonely living alone, started working part-time. That day was a holiday, and since it was sunny and warm, I was cleaning the house when Kayla arrived. As soon as she entered the house, she hugged me and said with shining eyes,
Mom, I'm pregnant.
I was delighted by my daughter's wonderful news. Congratulations, that's great. You told Simon, right? He must be thrilled. When I mentioned her in-laws, Kayla's expression suddenly stiffened. Kayla, what's wrong? When I looked into Kayla's face, she quickly returned to her usual smile.
Nothing, really. But I have a favor to ask, Mom.
Although I was concerned about Kayla, I had to listen if she had a request. A favor? What is it? Kayla lowered her eyes hesitantly, but then looked at me straight, with determination.
This is my first time giving birth. I'm nervous, so I want to be with you, Mom.
I was taken aback by my daughter's unexpected request. I had imagined something serious, and thought it was beyond my control. Oh, that's no problem. Take your time and relax here.
Thank you.
Kayla breathed a big sigh of relief. I wondered if it was okay not to inform her in-laws, but I assumed they had communicated as a couple. However, I soon learned why Kayla's expression had clouded. Kayla quickly packed some simple belongings and came to the house, but soon after, Simon showed up following her. Oh, welcome. Is something wrong? Simon remained silent in response to my question. Standing at the entrance with a pout and looking down. Not knowing what to do, I stood there until Kayla peeked out.
Hey, what are you doing here?
At Kayla's words, Simon finally looked up.
Mom told me to watch over you since you're going to your family home, Kayla.
Simon puffed his cheeks like a sulking child.
But I explained everything, didn't I? Why did you follow me?
Kayla seemed exasperated by Simon's actions. After some back and forth, Simon ended up staying at my house. Since he hadn't brought much, we had to buy a new toothbrush and underwear. Even though he was my son-in-law, having a man suddenly living in the house made me uneasy. Kayla seemed to find Simon a bit annoying, but he didn't cause any problems. Thus, without any major incidents, we lived our lives smoothly. Then Kayla was hospitalized for childbirth, and Simon returned to his family home, making the house quiet again. I realized how lonely it was without Kayla's good morning every day for the first time in months. To distract myself from the loneliness, I prepared for work more energetically than usual. Just as I left the house, a neighbor kindly spoke to me.
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for the other day. You really helped me out.
You're welcome. I'm always here to help if you need anything.
Really, everyone in the neighborhood appreciates you. If you ever need anything, just let us know.
I felt my face flush with both happiness and embarrassment. Thank you. I have to get to my part-time job now.
Have a great day.
I often helped out my neighbors, so I was frequently thanked like this. However, I considered it just a matter of course, so hearing thank you always made me feel a bit embarrassed. Besides, everyone was kind and gentle, so I never felt like I was losing out. Well, time to get to work. I shifted my focus and headed to my workplace. Just before lunch break, I received an urgent phone call. The caller was Simon.
Kayla's labor has started. Please come soon.
Feeling a bit uneasy at his robotic tone, I immediately left work early and headed to the hospital. When I arrived at the hospital, Claire was already there, but she ignored me and kept talking to Simon. It seemed neither of them intended to be present for the birth, so I decided to wait in front of the delivery room. However, I was more concerned about the baby's safe delivery than anything else. And equally, I was excited to see what kind of child would be born. How much time had passed? Suddenly, a baby's cry echoed from the room. I looked up in surprise as the door opened and a nurse speaked out.
The baby is safely born. It's a girl.
When I entered the delivery room, Kayla, drenched in sweat, was holding the baby with a relieved expression. I gazed at my tiny granddaughter in Kayla's arms. The baby's body was so small that her eyes weren't even open yet. The baby was soon handed to Simon. "Kayla, you did great. I'm so proud of you." Kayla, exhausted, just nodded without replying. Meanwhile, Claire and Simon were discussing what to name the baby. Even after handing me the baby, they didn't offer any words of encouragement to Kayla. Instead, they avoided looking at her as if ignoring her. Watching them, I became worried about whether Kayla could continue her married life. Fortunately, both Kayla and the baby were perfectly healthy, so they were soon discharged. I couldn't wait to see my granddaughter's face, but I didn't feel like going to the in-laws' house. However, I couldn't ask Kayla to come home, so I continued my usual routine. A few weeks after Kayla was discharged, I had a day off, but it was raining outside, so I stayed home. Suddenly, the intercom rang, and the front door was pounded loudly. I was startled and headed to the entrance, hearing a muffled, angry voice from the other side of the door.
"Hey, I know you're in there. Open the door."
With trembling hands, I unlocked the door. As soon as it opened, Claire forced her way in through the gap. She glared at me with bulging eyes.
"How dare you deceive my son? Take responsibility."
She shouted, her eyes bloodshot and spitting as she spoke. Behind her stood Simon with a blank, expressionless face. "Wait a minute, what's going on all of a sudden?" I had no idea what she was talking about, so I tried to ask for an explanation, but Claire wouldn't listen.
"You think you can deceive me just because you're rich? You'll be paying alimony for this."
She marched forward, pointing her finger in my face, forcing me to step back. "What are you talking about? Please explain." Claire's shrill voice pierced my ears, giving me a headache.
She cheated. Mom is angry. You take responsibility.
Enough. If this went on any longer, I felt like I would lose my mind from the stress. Hearing my shout, Claire stopped yelling and stared at me with wide eyes and a half-open mouth. "I'm sorry, I really don't understand what's going on. You need to explain, or I can't say anything." But the two of them remained silent. After a moment of silence, Claire finally spoke without changing her expression.
"Fine, then come to our house."
At Claire's suggestion, I was about to visit the in-laws' house for the first time. It wasn't far, so we walked there. I felt like more than half my energy had already been drained. Reluctantly, I followed them under an umbrella, noticing the worried looks from my neighbors. Their house was in an old residential area, but the interior looked even more worn than the exterior. The wood on the ceiling and walls was dull and stained, and the floor mats were tattered from years of use. The lighting was old fluorescent bulbs, and combined with the bad weather, it was dim inside. The furniture and appliances were old, as if time had stopped in the 1950s. In the corner of the room sat Kayla, holding the baby tightly, with tears in her eyes. "Kayla, what happened?" Before Kayla could answer, Claire spoke up.
Look at the baby's eyes.
Following Claire's instruction, I looked into the baby's eyes. What I saw shocked me, and I couldn't help but scream. The baby's eyes were bright dark, like a foreigner's.
Now do you understand? This woman had an affair. Those eyes are the proof. Take responsibility.
Kayla lifted her tear-filled eyes and glared at Claire.
That's a misunderstanding. I didn't have an affair.
Shut up. How dare you betray my precious son?
Simon also raised his voice behind her.
You're the worst, making both me and Mom angry. We'll get alimony for Mom's retirement too.
I stood there silently listening to the exchange. Indeed, the baby's dark eyes were impossible for a child born of two American parents. But I knew my daughter better than anyone. Her expression showed no sign of deceit. So, I believed in Kayla. Wait, let's calm down. There must be an explanation.
There is no explanation. She cheated. The baby's eyes are the proof.
Claire pointed at the baby with bloodshot eyes. The baby suddenly started crying loudly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Don't cry, sweetie.
Kayla desperately tried to soothe the baby, but Claire and Simon didn't care. I worried that continuing this argument here would harm Kayla and the baby. Wait, let's not fight in front of the baby. Can we go to another room? They nodded at my suggestion and led me to the next room. But it seemed more for the sake of silencing the baby's cries than for consideration. Kayla tried to follow, but I stopped her with my hand. You stay here and take care of the baby. Don't worry, I'll handle this. I didn't want my beloved daughter to suffer anymore.
Mom.
However, the discussion in the other room didn't progress at all. I desperately explained that Kayla didn't know any foreigners, but Claire refuted me.
That's unreliable. These days you can meet anyone online.
It seemed this mother and son were more focused on how much alimony they could get from us than on the truth of the affair. No matter what I said, the conversation always turned to money. But then Claire said something unforgivable.
I was planning for her to take care of me in my old age. Now that's ruined. Take responsibility.
Why is caregiving a given? That's ridiculous. Did they think my daughter was some kind of housekeeper? Even if she was her daughter-in-law, I couldn't tolerate such treatment. Claire was seriously planning to use Kayla until the end. And Simon thought it was only natural. I realized then how abnormal this family was.
This is going nowhere. Just take that kid and the useless woman and go home. I don't want to see their faces.
Claire spat out these words, but for once, I agreed. I didn't want Kayla to stay here a second longer. I immediately took Kayla and left the house. As we walked home, Kayla cried the whole way, but she seemed somewhat relieved once we got back home. Her expression softened, and she spoke gently to the baby. Kayla, I believe you, but let me ask, you really didn't cheat, right?
I didn't. Absolutely not.
Kayla looked straight at me without averting her eyes. As I thought, there was no lie or deception in her expression. I understand. Then why does the baby have dark eyes? That's the problem. I had thought about it on the way back, but I had no idea. So, I decided to contact my husband, who was overseas. But no matter how many times I called, I couldn't reach him. Even considering the time difference, it wasn't that late there yet. I decided to call his company directly. After a bit of hassle, I finally got through to someone and explained the situation, asking to speak to my husband, but it was no use. He was currently working deep in the mountains, making it difficult to contact him. I was worried about him working in such a place, but there was nothing I could do, so I asked them to have him call me when he returned.
Dad seems to have it tough. Why did he go overseas?
Kayla murmured as she watched the rain outside the window. I don't know. There must be a reason, but he doesn't talk much about himself. Anyway, I have an idea. Will you listen? Kayla turned to me slowly.
What is it?
To prove you're telling the truth, we should get a DNA test. I know you don't want to, but please cooperate. At this point, it seemed like the only thing we could do. No matter how much we argued, we were at a disadvantage against those two. So, we'd use science to prove it. With that, we could help Kayla even if it went to court. Kayla's eyes lit up at the mention of a DNA test.
A DNA test? That's a good idea. But will Simon agree to it?
Kayla's worry soon proved accurate. On my next day off, I went to the in-laws' house to tell them about the DNA test. As before, the house was dimly lit, as if we were in a cave due to the cloudy weather.
So, will you be paying the alimony?
Claire was in a surprisingly good mood compared to last time. Yes, about that, I have something to discuss. At that moment, Simon came in and offered me coffee. Thank you.
Simon, you're so good. Such a good boy.
Claire said happily, patting Simon's head. He looked pleased to be praised by her. You two get along well. When I said that, they both smiled broadly at me.
Of course, since my husband left, he's been my only family. I love him so much.
I love you too, Mom.
The mother and son were acting affectionately, almost like lovers. Honestly, I was terrified to bring up the DNA test at a time like this, but it had to be done. So, to clarify things, I think we should do a DNA test. As soon as they heard my words, they froze. Claire's eyes started darting around again, and Simon's face became expressionless.
A DNA test. Are you trying to harm Simon?
It seemed I had pressed a bad button.
Your family is the worst. You don't trust us at all. You look down on us. Can't you tell she cheated without all this?
The attack started again, but this was a crucial moment. With scientific proof, both sides will be satisfied. We'll cover the cost, of course.
Science. You think just because you're rich you can look down on us? I've had enough. Simon, punish her.
Following Claire's command, Simon stood up with a blank expression. Please, it's a simple matter.
Shut up. I'll post this on social media. Simon, get a knife from the kitchen.
Okay, Mom.
Simon headed to the kitchen. It wasn't safe to stay here any longer. I took advantage of a brief distraction, ran past Claire, and dashed to the front door. I grabbed my shoes in my hands instead of putting them on and burst outside.
Stop. You won't get away with this. I'll make you pay.
Claire's shouts echoed behind me as I ran desperately. After running a bit, I looked back to see that Claire wasn't following me. I put on my shoes. The skin on the soles of my feet was peeled and painful, but I was relieved to be safe. I managed to make it home, but from that day on, the harassment from Claire and her son began. They spread flyers around the neighborhood accusing Kaylee of infidelity, sometimes even shouting it as they walked around. I reported it to the police, but they dismissed it as it wasn't a crime. I had to quit my part-time job and couldn't leave the house. This happened almost daily, but thankfully they didn't come on rainy days. Watching the rain through the window, I felt relieved that Claire wasn't coming today. Kayla had become a bit gaunt from the stress, but she continued to take care of the baby without complaint. When the baby was born, everything was peaceful. I reminisced about when Kayla was pregnant. I remembered how Simon had forced his way into our house. If only I had noticed their abnormal behavior back then, Kayla wouldn't be suffering now. We had to buy necessities for him, but he never paid us back. Of course, the things I bought for him, like a toothbrush and underwear, aren't very expensive, so it's not worth asking him to pay me back. As I thought about it, I suddenly remembered something. The toothbrush, I haven't thrown it away yet. I immediately went to the sink, opened the cabinet, and found Simon's toothbrush hidden in the corner. I carefully picked it up like a precious treasure and put it in a plastic bag. Kayla, I did it. I found Simon's toothbrush. Now we can do the DNA test. When I showed Kayla the toothbrush in the plastic bag, her eyes lit up. The DNA test to determine the baby's parentage was successfully conducted. Meanwhile, Claire's harassment continued, but we waited patiently. Unlike before, we now had hope in the form of the DNA test. Everything was going to be fine. Finally, the envelope with the results arrived, and we opened it together to verify the truth. The results clearly stated that the baby was indeed Kayla and Simon's child. As soon as Kayla read it, she collapsed and started crying loudly. I couldn't tell if she was crying from happiness or frustration. What was certain was that she hadn't cheated. While this was a relief, the mystery of the baby's dark eyes remained unsolved. The answer soon came from my husband's call.
Sorry for the late reply. What happened?
I summarized the events and finally asked if he had any clue about the baby's dark eyes. He didn't respond immediately and seemed to be thinking for a while before he spoke.
I haven't told you this before, but I have foreign blood. The country I'm currently in is actually my grandmother's homeland. That's why I felt a connection and volunteered for the assignment.
I didn't know that.
I'm sorry. My hypothesis is that my grandmother had dark eyes, and that gene must have been passed down and appeared in Kayla's baby.
With my husband's explanation, the mystery was finally solved, and Kayla and I hugged in joy. The next day was sunny, and Claire and Simon came to our house. With the DNA test results in hand, I calmly let them in. As soon as they entered the living room, they sat down and demanded alimony.
We won't leave until you agree to pay. We might even start living here from today.
They said that and refused to move from the spot. I showed them the DNA test results. After reading it, they immediately started complaining.
This is a fake. You made this up to deceive us.
If you're not satisfied, we can do another test. We have the toothbrush, so it's easy. But they wouldn't back down that easily. Claire crumpled the test results and threw them at me.
Don't get cocky. This fake means nothing. Then explain why the baby's eyes are dark.
I explained what my husband had told me. Since it's in the genes, it's possible. If you're not satisfied, we can do a genetic test as well. I made sure to remain firm and composed. The internet said that was the best way to deal with people like Claire. As expected, neither Claire nor Simon could argue further. They seemed to be thinking of a way out, but couldn't come up with anything.
But, fine, we'll leave for today.
With that, the two stood up and walked to the front door as if nothing had happened, and I followed them. Wait a minute, shouldn't you at least apologize to Kayla? You both blamed her so much. But Claire didn't listen to me and even spat at me.
Shut up. Don't think you've won. I'll post your wrongdoings on social media. Just wait.
Mom, I'll help. I'll spread embarrassing pictures of Kayla online too.
With those words, they stepped outside. Wait. I couldn't let them ruin Kayla's life any further. I quickly put on my slippers and ran outside, but what I saw was unexpected. Around 10 neighbors had gathered in front of the house, all glaring at Claire and Simon.
What do you want? This has nothing to do with you.
Even Claire seemed frightened by their intensity, her voice trembling.
It has everything to do with us. You've caused Rebecca and Kayla so much trouble. You think you can just leave.
At a neighbor's remark, everyone started shouting in unison. Apologize to Rebecca and Kayla, they demanded, closing in on Claire and Simon. Overwhelmed, they couldn't make their usual attacks and were cornered. Whenever they tried to escape, the neighbors blocked their way, leaving them flustered. In the end, they had no choice but to kneel and apologize to Kayla and me.
We're sorry.
Claire's face turned red as she pressed her forehead to the asphalt. That's not enough. Promise here and now that you'll leave us alone and delete Kayla's photos. Claire remained silent, sweating. She knew that without those photos, she had no leverage. But under the neighbors' stern looks, they finally agreed to my demands. After their apology, they quickly fled. I was filled with gratitude for my neighbors. I'm sorry for all the trouble I've caused everyone. But they looked at me kindly.
No need to apologize. We're all here to help each other. You've always been there for us, Rebecca, and we all believed you were right.
Hearing that, I felt all the hardships had been worth it, and tears welled up in my eyes. When I turned around, Kayla was also crying while holding her baby. After that, peace returned to our lives. The weather was nice, and bright light filled the room. In that warm sunlight, the baby crawled and played with toys. Kayla and I watched over her lovingly.
It was really touch and go for a while, but I'm glad everything's resolved.
Really, I never thought Claire would be exposed online.
It can't be helped. She did a lot of flashy things. And Simon got demoted and sent to a remote place.
I had heard from the neighbors about their fate. Claire became infamous online, so she couldn't go outside due to pranks on her house. And her beloved son being sent far away must be hard on her mentally. It can't be helped. We did what we had to. I felt a bit of an aftertaste thinking about them.
Yeah, it was really tough. But I'm so glad this little one was born.
Kayla looked at her child with love. The baby's dark eyes had faded over time and were now blue. Without those eyes, Kayla's life would have been disrupted even more. So, in a way, we were saved by this child. Well, I'm going shopping. I'll make a fancy dinner. I stood up and grabbed my shopping bag. I remembered my husband's favorite dishes.
It's been a while since Dad's coming home.
Yes, so I have to make it special. I was excited to cook for my husband again. He must be looking forward to seeing his first grandchild. Our family would be together again. Feeling the joy of spending time with my family, I headed out for shopping.